my special guest today is Joe Wilson from BBC Radio Lancashire. And it's an honour to have you on, Joe. I appreciate you carving out some time for me today.
That's okay. That's no problem at all. What do you need to know? Are you going to give me a grilling?
Not at all. I couldn't possibly give you a grilling. I've been looking forward to hearing your insights and more about your career, and it's a bit intimidating being on the other end of interviewing you rather than you being the interviewer. But I wonder first if I could find out a bit about so I'll have covered your intro already, but what was your upbringing like in terms of faith? Did you have a faith-filled upbringing?
In terms of faith, I grew up in the sainted capital of Bolton, and lived there for a very sizable part of my early life. And part of Bolton is a town called Farnworth, which is where I actually lived. And there I went to a Roman Catholic school and to a Roman Catholic church, and I went there for the primary school, and then infants, and then primary school, and then on to secondary school, and left there when I was about 15 or 16. And throughout that time, I was brought up in the Catholic Church, in the Roman Catholic Church.
Were you quite a strict adherent of Catholicism?
My family were. My mum was a devout Catholic, very, very devout. My dad, probably, I suppose so. I think my dad used to take the line of anything for a quiet life, really. So I think he was quite. We went every week. We went to church every Sunday. The church was only at the top of the street. I served for a time as an altar boy, and then after that, you sort of jack that in when you're around about 11, 12 years of age. We went off and do that. And I kind of left the church, I suppose you could argue, when I was about 15, something like that.
Right. You're obviously a big personality in the local communities with regards to faith, but would you say you have had many sort of spiritual experiences that brought you to God throughout your life?
No, I wouldn't have said that. I think it's fair to say that I left Catholicism when I was about, as I say, 14, 15, maybe 16 at most, and never went back. And that's not to say that I don't go and visit churches, because I do that all the time as part of my job, and it doesn't say it doesn't interest me. But what I would say is that, and I'd like to tell you that I actually left the church over some doctrinal reason. I looked at something and thought, well, that's not right, I'm not having any of that. That isn't the case at all. I left the church because I got bored, and I think a lot of young people do, and I think a lot of youngsters leave churches because they find it repetitive, and they don't necessarily buy into the doctrines of the church. And I think there's and I've realised this in later life, that there's a great deal of difference between what you might call doctrinal church and what churches do. And I think there's a very big difference there. And I think that is something I've come to realise over the last 20 years, 25 years or so. But at the time when I left the church, no, I left the church because I was bored. I left the church because it was an hour I had to waste every Sunday. I saw it as a 14, 15-year-old, something like that. I didn't particularly want to do it. And I kind of rebelled. I got a great education out of the Roman Catholic Church. And I know the Catholic Church would say that I am forever a Catholic. And, once a baptised Catholic, you're always a Catholic. That's in their domain. It's not necessarily as I see it, but it is how they see it. And I accept that that's the way that they will see it. But I don't necessarily think that that's the practicality of the matter.
Could you dig into what you said earlier about the difference between what you thought churches did and the doctrinal difference? Because that sounded interesting, but I'd like to know.
Yeah, I think churches, for me, and it's not just churches really, it's faith groups generally. It's not just about Christianity, it's about any sort of faith group. To be a member of that group, you have to believe the doctrines of that group, whatever that group believes. So if it is a Hindu faith or a Sikh tradition or Muslim tradition, whatever that faith is, if you kind of sign up to it, if you say, yes, that's what I believe, then that's fine. What I find difficult to accept at times, and I think I did when I was 18, is that at 18 I can vote for who I like, and I can go into a pub, and I can drive a car, and I can do any one of a number of things. But apparently, according to my upbringing of church, I can't step back and decide what faith suits me. I was baptized a Catholic, and they tell me I'm going to be a Catholic for the rest of my life, and that is something that I think I wrestled with. But to actually talk about the doctrinal thing, I think that is a belief in history, and that is a belief in tradition, and it's a belief in what people believe in. It's what they do. It's they believe this. This is the way we came to be on this planet. This is how we should live our lives, and so on and so forth. And I think that can be divorced from the actual practicalities of what people do in church and what people do as a church. And I always hear lots of people talking about, I'm not a Christian, I'm a Muslim, or I don't go to church, or I don't do this, I don't do that. I think we all kind of live our life by the same creed, really. We all want to be nice to each other. We all want to look after each other, or at least we should do. We all want to be good citizens, and we all want to be good people. And we all want to try and make the best of what we've got and whatever those talents are. And if we find people around us struggling, we should be giving them a lift up, and we should be helping them. I think pretty much every faith subscribes to that. So there's got a lot of common ground, and I would subscribe to that. What I do find difficult to accept is the belief in certain faith tenets. So people say, well, you know, if you're in this church, you've got to believe that Jesus Christ did this and he did that and did the other, and all so on and so forth. And I think that the two are quite separate. I think how we live our lives and how we should live our lives, and the social justice work that faith groups, my experiences of Lancashire, but I'm sure it's the same anywhere else, what people do for society is brilliant. It's absolutely astounding. And goodness knows where this country would be, or any country would be, without that input, and without that help, and without the food banks that folk run, and the social work that people do, and they're helping the homeless, and all these things are brilliant. They're really fantastic pieces of work. You know, they're great. It doesn't matter who's doing them. It doesn't matter what tradition's doing them. And to many people, I think 90% of faith is that. The 10% where you actually sit there and think to yourself, well, how did God arrive on this planet? Did God ever arrive on this planet? Did Jesus Christ ever really exist in the way that we believe him to have existed, or many people believe him to have existed, or was he just a very charismatic and well-meaning person? People have got all sorts of different views about that, and I think if you're part of a faith and sign up to it, then good luck to you. I don't have a problem with that. It's great. But I think I don't necessarily subscribe to any of that, but I do subscribe 300% to the brilliant work and the well-meaning work and the well-meaning people who exist in Lancashire and who do their work in Lancashire. I do subscribe 100% to them, because I think that what they do, they just have my total and utter admiration. If I can't go the last 10% and agree particularly with their faith or their tradition, then, you know, fine. But I don't think that should get in the way of anything, really.
So for those, that's a really interesting take. And for those people who have stayed within their traditional religious community and feel that is out of, you know, intentionality rather than sort of, all right, I'm lumped in this is my identity, right, with it being a choice. What's your message to them about how they can cultivate more tolerance and inclusivity, as well as working with other interfaith groups that I know you've covered a lot of stuff like that on your show?
Well, the first thing I'd say is it is not wrong to take a different view to what I've just suggested. So in other words, I would walk away from the church, as I did do when I was 14 or 15, as I say, largely because I was bored. But when I look back at it now, And I look back, I went to a baptism some years after I'd left the church, and I went to a baptism, and I read the Bible and I read the prayer book for the very first time, in a way, because when I went to school, it was basically drummed into me. It was, learn the catechism, learn this sentence, learn the Ten Commandments, we'll be testing you later, all this sort of thing. And it's sort of drummed into you. And that's fine. But when you become a free-thinking person in your teens, and you start to actually read what is placed in front of you, you start to realise at times that you don't quite necessarily agree with this. And it's my thinking that if you do agree with it, brilliant. That is great. I've got friends who I went to school with, I still see, I still go to the football with them. They still go to church. They still enjoy the Roman Catholic faith. And they believe it intensely. They live their life by it. And good luck to them. I don't. But I do subscribe to very much of what that tradition says and what your tradition says and what everybody's tradition says, which is to ensure that we live our life the best we can as decent people and help each other and do all that we can. And it's not wrong, for instance, for us to look at other people who are not of faith and say, well, you're kind of slightly inferior to us. No, they're not. They're just as good. Sometimes many times better than we are, and I'm not of faith as such, and so I look at lots of people, and I think what we have to do, and I think what has happened increasingly, and I think it's happened with your tradition, is that maybe 25, 30 years ago, people would look at the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints, and they would just look at it and say, oh, I'm a bit worried about that, a bit bothered about all that. I remember covering the opening of the temple, and when it opened, and people were up in arms in Chorley and all sorts of places. This temple that was arriving in Chorley and what have you. 25 years, 30 years later, it doesn't seem that way at all now. People look at it, it's there, they have a welcome, I believe, for people who are around. There's no animosity, there's no worry, there's no fear. And I think most people take that view, or should at least take that view, that if people believe whatever they believe, let them get on with it. As long as it's not illegal, it's not harming anybody, carry on. What does it matter? If you want to coexist with other people, you have to accept that people are going to think differently than you. And I'll tell you one thing that's interesting as a broadcaster, and take it away from religion, take it to politics. I've covered many a general election. And people reckon they know which way you vote. When you're on the radio, they reckon they know where you vote. And I'll be honest, I'll tell you now who I vote for. I've voted for them all over the years. I think that the truth is that you look at each election and you sort of think to yourself, well, actually, at this set of circumstances, at this time in our history, these are probably the best people to vote for. And that's how I tend to view politics, and I'm a massive political animal. I love politics. But let me tell you what happens in a studio, in the radio studio at election time or any other time. The same thing happens with faith. People come into your studio, and say it's the Labour candidate, and they come into your studio and they tell you what they'd like to do at the next election, what they would do if they got voted, and you do an interview with them and you challenge them. And when they walk out, you very often think to yourself, well, they had a point. And then the Tory man comes in and he sits there and he tells you what he wants to do. And you think, well, he's very nice as well. He has a point. And then the Liberal Democrat will come in, and then whoever comes in, and they all come in one after the other. They all want to do well. And they all, to a certain extent, have a point. And what you have to do, I believe anyway, what I have to do as a broadcaster, and also what people have to do with faith, is to listen to what those people have to say. And then decide, yeah, A, they've got a point. B, that they're well-meaning. They're not wishing to do anybody any harm. They're well-meaning. And then when we get beyond all of that, if it becomes a vote, then you might want to subscribe to one side or the other. But the bottom line is they're all trying to do their best. And everybody's trying to do what they can. And I think it would be wrong of me to say that I sit in front of a microphone with any particular axe to grind. We are incredibly assiduous about being as down the middle as we possibly can, and try to be as impartial as we can. It's the same with faith. I don't, for instance, see that your tradition is any better than anybody else's tradition, or that the Church of England trumped the Catholics or anything like that. And I'd like to think that over the last 30 or 40 years, we've got away from all that, and that people do just see people who do something else, be it on a Friday, a Saturday, or a Sunday, whenever they go to wherever they worship or whatever they do. Just accept that somebody down the street thinks a bit differently than you do and believes in what they believe in. And the bottom line is they'll probably help you if you find that you're in trouble. And that's all that matters, really.
Yeah. I think I agree with you that it's taken work and effort, but I think interfaith relationships have significantly improved. And, it's going to take more work and effort, but it's certainly a good path. And you talked there about broadcasting, and that segues onto a few questions I've wanted to ask you about that, which is, you're a Lancashire Bolton lad. You come from a farming history. You're into your football. What led you into broadcasting? What made you want to do that?
Yeah, I don't know where you got the farming from, but I wouldn't describe myself as with a farm. I come from an industrial background, really, in the sense that.
I thought Lancashire was a very farming.
Yeah, Lancashire's 80% rural, but I'm not a farmer, and I've never really aspired to be one, actually. I've got the absolute admiration for farmers. They get up at like 3 o'clock in the morning every day. I only do it once or twice a week, but they do it every day. And they're out there on ploughs in the middle of winter and what have you. Oh no, the farming community. And I love walking. I do a tremendous amount of walking. And I do enjoy walking through farms and across moorland, and they look after all that, and they're really good. No, I grew up in Farmouth, basically, the Bolton area in Farmouth. We started in Harwood and then moved on to there. And for a very large part of my life, that's where I've been. I don't live there now, but it is where I've been. And
I think that's where I misunderstood, Joe, is I've been studying about your past as I've been researching, and I must have misread it as you grew up on farms or in farms, not in farmer.
Yeah, I do sort of live around a farming community, I suppose, in some respects. But yeah, like you said, Lancashire is very heavily rural. So no, I came to broadcasting really where I came from, Farmouth and Bolton. It wasn't really a pathway that was well trodden working for the BBC where I come from, and I really, I suppose, I've always had an interest in. I didn't realise it at the time, but I've always had an interest in journalism and how things got to be on the radio and how stuff happened and people's political views and current affairs and all that sort of thing. I've always been interested in that. But I suppose really I made my way going forward as a DJ in clubs, and then joined the BBC when local radio became established. And I joined Radio Manchester back in probably about 1976, 77, somewhere around there. Moved to Radio Lancashire and I've been at Radio Lancashire ever since, but not really as a person who just jocks, if you like. I can do that, and I do a lot of that sometimes, especially over Christmas and times like that. But also somebody who's fronts a lot of country affairs programmes and political programmes and discussions and all that sort of stuff. And at the moment, my role, and it has been really for many years, is to do the faith programme on a Sunday, and I usually have other programmes that go with it, but also at the same time I do a lot of filling for folk when they're on holiday. So I do a lot of mid-morning programmes and afternoon programmes, things like that. And the beauty of doing stuff like that is that you get to meet everybody, all sorts of people. And a lot of people think to you, if you meet some famous person and they say, oh, that must be fantastic. Do you know, the most interesting people to meet are not the famous people. The most interesting people to meet are people you've never heard of and that you will never have heard of, but they've done stuff and they live their life, and they have done things in their life which we can only stand back and admire. And they're never ever going to be I'm a Celebrity, and they're never ever going to be feted at the London Palladium. but they're far more entertaining and engaging than many of the celebrities I've met who are household names, and that's a fact of life to me. I've met some remarkable people in Lancashire who've done some remarkable things, and yet ultimately we probably don't know most of them, you know.
Mm-hmm. And how did your journey into broadcasting? You said you wanted to do this faith and ethics show, the Sunday morning show, but from your background, it sounds like there was a bit of boredom around that. I'm interested in why you wanted to do that.
How did I get into faith broadcasting? I got asked to do it. That's as simple as that, really. When you work for local radio, you can be asked to do anything. I can be asked to do the morning programme, the afternoon programme, breakfast programmes. I've done sport programmes over the years. I can be asked to go and do a faith programme. I can do programmes in front of audiences, all that sort of thing. It's what the radio station demands of you, really. And I suppose in many respects, I would say that radio has changed a lot over the years. It has changed a great deal. And you have to change with it. For instance, today I've been setting up our faith programme for Sunday morning, but at the same time, I've also been putting stuff on the BBC website, on BBC Sounds. I'm putting 4 or 5 pieces up there today, which are nothing to do with broadcasting as such as you would remember. Excuse me. But they are about journalism, because they're about sticking stuff online so that people can read it and read stories about interesting people. And I think I started off effectively wanting to be Tony Blackburn or, probably Noel Edmonds at the time. Noel Edmonds was the DJ I quite admired at the time. I've always liked Blackburn and Edmonds. And now you just have to do anything. And it's the same with local radio. Local radio is a really big umbrella. If you work for Radio 1 or Radio 2, you're ostensibly kicking out tunes, aren't you? You know, you'll do a few other things, but largely that's what you're doing. But local radio is expected to encapsulate all of that and then do a load of journalism on top. And that's why I like it. And that's why I've never moved from it. It's because of the diversity. And as for going into faith, I was asked to do it. And you just make the best of what you can do. And people seem to have liked what we've done over the years. And so I've kind of been given it. And that's how it's happened, really.
Mm-hmm. And you've been running it excellently, I should say, for a long time now. Aren't you the longest running continuous broadcaster on BBC Radio? Is that correct?
No, I don't think so.
Or longest running faith broadcaster?
Probably that's right. That might well be right. There's not a lot in it. But recently 1 or 2 have left, and that could well be the case now. I'm not the longest serving broad. I don't think so. Anyway, I've never thought of it that way, but I don't think that's true. For instance, there's no, I'm definitely not. I tell you now, because I'm just thinking of some names now in my head, and I can think of at least 2 people who've been in it longer than me. And there must be lots more, but I can only just think of 2 off the top of my head. But there will be more.
In terms of faith specifically, you have been that stalwart along it. And well, what have been some of your favourite moments from running the Sunday morning show over the years?
That's a good question. There are things I recall. There are. Let me think. I remember covering the opening of your temple. I remember that. That was a happy time and a good time. There has been, I think the launch of Lancashire Sings Christmas was another good thing that we did. There was also the Queen on coming for Maundy Money at the Cathedral in Blackburn. I've seen Bishops of Blackburn come and go, so that's always been fun. And there's been, I think, quite a few things. But the landmark things, I think, is the arrival of your temple. That's one. The Gujarat Hindu temple as well in Preston. That's another great place to go and visit. And I seem to recall their fledgling years and them becoming more and more prevalent in society. Building bridges in Burnley as well. That was another thing, because that came out of they decided not to call it a riot, but most people did. But it was basically described as disturbances. And that and the work that goes on there and continues to go on there, and also at Pendle as well, that is very good. That's something, again, that's a highlight. But we talk about highlights. I come back to what I said earlier, really, which is about the people you meet, and you drive away from places. I mean, I'll tell you, there's a lady long since gone, unfortunately, called Dorothy McGregor. Dorothy was in Accrington. She described herself as a hermit, and she used to get up at she lived in a caravan, as I recall, and she was she'd get up around about 2:45 in the morning, something like that, and she spent the first hour or so of the day praying. And she set up a sort of community in Accrington, Morning Relief, and she set up a community in Accrington, which was there to assist anybody who was struggling with the world and anybody who was without a home or whatever. And Dorothy garnered around her some great people, including Julie Hesmondhalgh from Coronation Street and lots of other telly-programmes fame. And they all work to help people in the Hyndburn area and try and assist them in whatever problems that they got. And people like her are basically living saints, really. And we talked about what they believe and all this sort of thing. In many respects, you judge somebody like that just by what they've done. It's the fact that they go to church is almost irrelevant to a certain extent, because look at what they've done to the world. And it could have been done quite easily by somebody who is not of faith but just believes you should help people. And you can sacrifice a lot of your life, pretty much all of your life, to helping folk and doing that. And yes, her faith drove her to doing it, but at the same time, I suspect she would still have done it if she didn't have a faith. And they're the kind of highlights that I recall, and the people that you meet as you go along the way.
You've mentioned a couple times about the opening of the temple in Preston. Obviously of unique interest to me, and that was dedicated and completed the year I was born, 1998, which is crazy to think. And so I wonder, could you share from someone who, because many people who are listening to this in reality will be of my faith, and it would be interesting to hear what the atmosphere was like, what it was all like from your perspective as someone not.
Wow, yeah. Well, this is from memory, and so there may be one or two factual things that are wrong. But I think what happened was we got sort of knowledge of you doing it, of your faith doing it. I don't know for certain, but I should say several years before, maybe even as early as 1990. I seem to recall there was an obsession, and I was part of the obsession, of how much it cost. Right, so that was quite an obsession. And as it was built further and further, we wanted access to it. We wanted to see what they were doing. We wanted to know what was going on. From memory, a third of your temple's underground, and again, that was something that we came to all want to know about. And I think, to a certain extent, many of the journalists, myself included, were quite ignorant about your beliefs when it was first muted. Right, we were quite ignorant of your beliefs. We didn't know what your beliefs are. And I think at the time the climate was such, and many people said this, that people who are members of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are not Christians. And that was what was said quite extensively around that in the mid-90s, say. And And I recall when it was that basically it was all dictated to by your media unit in Birmingham. And they weren't for letting us come and have a look or anything like that. We did ask repeatedly to come and see. And eventually they had a press day. And this was about a month before they actually sealed the temple. And we were invited to go and have a look around, and we had a tour around. But by this time, we've gone on several years now, we had read up about you and learned about the faith and learned about the tradition and what it was all about and all this sort of thing. So we became probably the best informed journalists in the air anywhere around about what was going on. So there was all of that going on, and at the same time too, there was a more secular view of what was going on, because people were also saying that the house prices in Chorley and Whitley Woods and round there, they were going to shoot through the roof because people of your faith would want to gather with close proximity to the area, to the temple, and so consequently the house prices were going to shoot up. That was another thing that they thought. And another thing also that people were very concerned about was that you were going to be all over the area banging on doors and saying, can we help and can we do this, and would you come to join our faith, and can you do this and can you do that and can you do the other, and all that was going on. So those were basically the areas of what was happening. I don't know if you picked that up. Then I should I turn my volume down for you? I don't want to. Can you still hear me now? Am I still all right there?
I can hear you perfectly.
I can't hear you then. So anyway, not to worry. If it happens again. Anyway, so that's what it was like. And there was a I think massive interest. But at the same time, there was also massive scepticism as well of what was happening here. So come the day when we went round, there was a big press interest in it. And we were taken on a trip round for probably 2 or 3 hours. Some people asked some very interesting questions of it. And I remember that and thinking to myself, there's some very perceptive questions that were asked. And then after that, and this had been going on in the background for about 12 months, there was also the point of who was going to come and see it beside the journalists. So what would happen to the wider community before it was sealed? And there was something like a fortnight that was designated for people to go and have a look round. And all in proper trips, you didn't just march up and what have you. But I do remember that some of the churches in the area were very, very reticent to allow their clergy to go. And I do know that some felt that they on no account should be seen being photographed by anybody if they're going to go round the temple, and certainly not with any of your elders or anything like that, because they did not want to be seen of the same tradition. Because of their belief that what you preach is not Christianity. And that was also something there that happened. We also, when we talked to other faiths, they were a bit reticent about talking about what they felt about the temple. They did come round quite quickly, 2 or 3 weeks after it'd been sealed or something like that, but they did come back quite quickly. And then, of course, it was sealed, and in it being sealed, that in itself created its own scepticism, and it created its own myths and what was going on there and how people behaved in there and what people did in there. And that, to a certain extent, persists to this day. But I don't think it's anything like as intense, nothing like as intense as it was 20 odd years ago. But there is a certain mystery about it. And there is a certain mystery about the area. I don't know what happened to the house prices. No idea at all. I don't think they changed radically, if the truth be told. But apart from that, whenever I've visited in the past, I've always been very impressed with the building and the way it runs, its life and what have you. And I think over the years, there has been an absolute dilution of what people felt, and I don't think now people care 2 hoots about it now. If they're not part of the temple, it's just another building that's there in in Chorley. And if you are of faith, you might you might look at it with a degree more interest. But there's no people getting exercised at all about it and thinking to themselves, this should not be allowed in our midst. And there were people at the time who did believe it shouldn't be allowed in their midst.
Right. That's fascinating. And looking on 25, yeah, it is 20. Yes, because I'm 25. Looking on 25 years later, we do have a big population of Latter-day Saints in Lancashire. I've just moved there myself, actually, not because of the temple, just because of found a good house. But what would I know? Lindsay Hoyle has, who's the MP for that local area, the constituency of Chorley, has spoken at times about advice for that Latter-day Saint community, the force for good they can be in the area. And there's been criticisms of time that were quite insular in the community, or perhaps,
That your church is insular.
That we volunteer a lot, but that volunteering is sort of focused on running our programs and such. So I wonder what your message is to Latter-day Saints in the community.
Yeah. My observation of that would be, I'm not certain it's the case. I think people are wary of you because of what is the mythology that grows. There's a television program that was on recently that you will have seen. There were certain things in there that people would look at and think to themselves, is that really a way we should behave, or that's the right thing to do? I, as a journalist, haven't got a view, really. I just think, and I take this with any faith and with any sort of, anything really, politics, whatever. If people want to live their life like that and feel that that is the right way of doing things, and that is what they should be doing, then let them get on with it. We are not here to dictate, are we? We're here simply to say, let's carry on. And that's what I would say to you, I suppose, really. Are you insular? I think you're wary. But I think we have grown up in such a way that there are people we can go to now at the temple and talk to, and they know we're not going to try and turn them over. And if they've got a view about something, as I say, we're quite happy to accept it. We will challenge it. We will talk about things, but at the same time, in a respectful way, and a way that says, you're right. As far as we're concerned, you're neither right nor wrong. We're there just purely to inquire why you feel that way, and is it the correct way of doing things? I think the television programme, to a degree, made one or two people a little bit sort of wary.
Which television programme was this?
This is the one that was on BBC Two about a year ago. This is the one that followed many of the young missionaries around.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And showed life for the missionaries. And there were one or two things there that people would say, well, actually, is that quite the right thing? But at the same time, there was nothing there that, if people, again, I keep coming back to this, if people, want to live their life and believe this is the correct thing to do, and believe that Jesus is telling them to do that, and that's the way that, they should be, do we not just stand back and say, carry on, and what's more to the point, applaud them for having the foresight to do what they wish to do, and that is the way I would view it. And I think that programme, to a degree, made people wonder, but at the same time, a lot of the scepticism and the wariness and the volunteering, and I don't know what the situation is like now, but I do know that many, many years ago, when there were various organisations getting up, interfaith organisations, they wouldn't entertain having the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in their group. Now, you weren't alone in that. There were others as well, other sort of like, well-established churches who they said, oh, well, you don't believe what we believe. And you would say, well, and I've stuck up for this view on the radio before now. I see that you're as much of a Christian as, say, a member of the Church of England. Because it's not for me to decide who is and isn't a Christian. If you tell me you're a Christian, you're a Christian. You believe in Jesus Christ, you're a Christian. No problem, right? It's not for me to decide that. It's for others to decide. It might be for me to talk about various things that you might believe or discuss stuff, but it's not for me to decide if you are or aren't a Christian. Some have taken the view already, and that sometimes is the difficulty. You're standing on one side of the street waving, saying, hello, I'd like to come and do this. We'll be part of that. And sometimes people are going, I'm not so certain you're already part of our gang. That happened for many years. I don't know whether it still exists to this day, but it did used to happen. And it's, it's people were brought up. You've got to remember that people have had sort of centuries, I suppose, have been brought up in a tradition. And then when somebody comes along and has a different take on it, which you do, then they might go, well, right, but you're not one of ours, right? You can believe it, but you're not one of ours. And that, I think, is what has happened. And I think that possibly those barriers are coming down. But it's for us to decide who's right and who's wrong. But I think that's where the wariness comes along. I'm not aware of what Lindsay's had to say, really, but at the same time, I do feel that I've only ever met people who I think want to do right and who have a different take on the world sometimes than other Christians. And that's, again, I come back to it, whoever's right, whoever's wrong. I'm not so certain. And I'll tell you another thing I think that doesn't help sometimes, and that is that your history, the way you express the history of your church and your sometimes doesn't fit with the history everybody's been taught, or not everybody, but a lot of people have been taught. And that sometimes is a clash. And people go, oh, they've made that bit up. And I don't know who's made what up. I don't believe anybody's made anything. It's what people believe. But you can equally look at the other side and say, well, actually, I think they made that bit up to be truthful. So I think there is a degree of awareness. And also, of course, the fact that nobody's allowed in your temple will probably always be a bit of a barrier for you, because people are naturally curious as to what is in there, what goes on in there. And they see the church, some people do, not everybody, but they do see the church sometimes as being on several levels, and everybody can go to the chapel and what have you, and they're very welcome to worship at the chapel and be part of the chapel that's there. But at the same time, go 100 yards up that car park and you're not allowed in. And that, I think, to some people, only adds to the mystery of the church.
Okay. Well, there's some good points in there. I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from your perspective. And also, I know the church has been really, without allowing people to have free roam to those buildings that we consider really sacred, they've been a lot more transparent on official church resources. And if you go to the church website, you can they've been a lot more transparent about what does occur in the temples, and quite comfortable in sharing that.
I agree with that. It's not my perspective. My perspective is only how I don't really have a perspective about your faith or your church or whatever in terms of my own personal thinking. I'm just saying that's how I believe people look at you. But what I would say is that until those, if you go to most other faiths, I think, they can walk through the door and they can see for themselves what it is like in a mosque or a temple, a gurdwara, anywhere. They can walk in. You can walk in Blackburn Cathedral. You can walk into a Roman Catholic church. You can go and have a look. The doors are wide open. Please come inside and have a look. And those doors don't remain open. And I think that's what causes the mystery for people. And I think also, if you like, myths grow up around it. people sort of think, oh, what else is going on there? And there's probably nothing to be overly bothered about or overly, sort of like wondering about. But until people see for themselves and see what is going on, then I think that sort of air of mystique will remain, and people will be slightly wary. And that's just the nature of human beings.
Yes.
There's nothing in that.
And it's understandable as well. It's funny hearing it although I definitely understand it, it's funny hearing it from my view, who I go quite often. And so, when I go, it's just like a normal trip for me. But it's obviously, yeah, I understand that. Moving on, what are we in a period, from your experience, where faith is prospering or faith is declining?
I think we need, I think, to go back to sort of half an hour or so ago and say that we need to look at this in two ways. The first thing is worship. Is worship prospering? I believe it is not prospering in the way that it could do, or that it does do. It is in some churches and some places. And it's interesting that the formalized sort of like established churches that people will have grown up over 30, 40 years, they're not perhaps as popular as they once were. However, there are other churches on the block that tend to be more community and social based. And I know that, for instance, in Lancashire, the Blackburn Diocese are trying very much to become much more relevant to the communities around them. Those people, they are doing very well. And you can go just, I don't know, half a mile from where you are, a mile from where you are, to the other side of Chorley, and there's a church there that's doing absolutely fantastic business. It's really, really, really well. And so I would say that when it becomes social, when it becomes community-based, when it becomes helping other people, when it becomes providing resources for people, it does very, very well. If you go from where you are now and literally go to the other side of Chorley, and you will find international relief, the organisation that Bernard Cocker has done. I don't think I've got the name right, but anyway, they've got their headquarters on the car park at the side of Asda, and they are one fantastic organisation based on faith, doing brilliant work, going all over the world to places you and I would run away from because there's bombs going up and all sorts of things. And they go to there and they do it. So faith is prospering there. And faith is prospering in many, many places like that. And in many, many places like that in Lancashire, food banks, all the social justice things that go on, the help that people are being to their communities. It is prospering all over the place. But if you're talking about people turning up on a Sunday morning with their best hat and coat on and going into church, I think you would have to say that numbers would suggest that maybe things aren't as they could be. But in terms of people wishing to express their beliefs, stroke faith in a way, then I think it's never been more required, because we've got a society at the moment that needs helping in many ways. And it's also never been any more flourishing and with great vision than it has been. Now, you, for instance, go down to the Foxton Centre at places at Preston, or you go to St Thomas's Church in Lancaster. You go to the Hindu temple at Preston. You go to many mosques in East Lancashire. Some of the Muslim mosques in East Lancashire, they were one of the first people to be heading off to the Ukraine when it all kicked off, to help those that were struggling, to help people who were coming over the border, to be able to clothe them and feed them and all this sort of stuff. So clearly faith is absolutely flourishing in Lancashire in that sense. But in the sense of turning up on a Sunday, or whenever the service might be, you have to look at a lot of the established churches, not the sort of like newer churches who've come on block, but the established churches, and you have to look at them and think to yourself, they're not doing as well as they could do, and they're not doing as well as they used to be. Another great church, just again not far from where you are, just up the A6 at the Crossgate Church in Preston. Fantastic work they do. They do really good, for want of a show business expression, they do really good business, right? They do a lot of numbers on seats on a Sunday morning. They do really well, and whatever service that they do, I've been there when it's been packed and loads of people there. Oh, they've got a cafe there, they've got a furniture bank there where they help people, and they've got all sorts of schemes going on to help folk in the community. And they recently opened, as I say, a cafe there because they're next to the prison, and they found that the prisoners' wives were coming along to the prison, and unfortunately they weren't able to get in straight away, and they were all queued up in the cold outside. So somebody said, well, we could help these people. So they threw the doors open and offered them coffee and stuff like that. That is brilliant. All that sort of stuff is faith. And if you actually go to some government department somewhere and say, what is the contribution in this county from faith? What is it worth financially? And set aside the tourism of people coming to look at Whalley Abbey or wherever, but just what do they make of it? And I think they would quantify it certainly in the millions. And it's phenomenal the help that they are to people, and taking the strain wherever possible of some of the other resources that are needed. The police recently have come to the faith communities and said, look, we're having to deal with a load of stuff that we don't really think we're the best people to deal with it. I was talking to the Chief Constable about 6 months or so ago, and he told me that something like 80% of all calls to the police could really be dealt with better by somebody else. And he was saying to the faith communities, look, can you help? Is there anything you can do that you can? And they're taking up challenges like that so that the police themselves can go and deal with some of the ne'er-do-wells that we have. And that is so faith is flourishing. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, sitting down for a mass or for an act of worship, that perhaps in some cases isn't quite as it could be.
I'd love to share with you a survey that was done this May, I believe, this year. I've read this a while ago, but I really wanted to get your take on it, which was, it overwhelmingly showed demand for high quality faith and belief media coverage, much more of it, which the people who did the survey found quite surprising. What do you think about that from a broadcaster perspective?
From a broadcasting point of view, I'm reminded of something that I learned a long time ago from another survey. And the feeling was that there should be more nature programmes on telly. People love their nature programmes. BBC should go and make tons more nature programmes. Get out there, get the cameras out there, get all the wild animals filmed and all this sort of thing. And so the BBC actually went down that road a bit and did some of that, only to find nobody watched it. Well, I say nobody watched it. People did watch it, but not in the numbers that the survey suggests. And I think there is a lot of times where people do a survey and they fill in the survey and say, yes, I would certainly watch hours and acres of faith programming on television. Please give me more of it. And when you put it on, it doesn't achieve what the survey says. So that is what I would say to that survey. However, if you're asking me, is there enough on and how diverse is it and should it be more of it and what have you? I think it's about right, really. I mean, I sometimes you can watch stuff, and it's not actually labelled as a religious programme or a faith programme, but it's actually got a lot of stuff in there, and you think to yourself, well, actually, why do people do that? Well, they do that because they believe in such and such a thing. I know the BBC is very interested in doing more on ethics and morals and debates on, how we should go forward and why people do stuff what they do. Now, you might not describe that as religious because they don't actually go into some sort of religious building and do it on that basis. But the bottom line is they are talking about a society doing good for people around them. And isn't that what Jesus Christ was all about? And so I think we're about right, I think. I'm very wary of surveys that tell me that we should have more football on the telly, or we should have more this on the telly, or more that on the telly, because when they come to put it on, very often the audiences, and also it has to be said too, the audience is so diverse now, that audience figures are such that you can find the kind of content you want on your tablet, on your computer, on wherever you want to watch it, any night of the week, really. Whenever you want, 24/7, it's there. And I mean, for instance, before, 30 years ago, we never had religious channels on the radio. Now we've got Premier Christian Radio, who do a brilliant job, and there's others as well, UCB and all these. They all do good jobs. There's podcasts like your own and all sorts of stuff. So I don't think there's ever been more. I just think there's so much of it around, but it is fragmented. You have to find it, but that's the same with pretty much any topic you want, really.
Right, and final thought is, going down the line, you've listed so many things, and you cover so many things on your show about what good people in churches, in social groups, in communities are doing. Looking further down the line at the younger generations, do you have hope?
In what sense? Do you mean in broadcasting, or do you mean in the world? In terms of the world, clearly, I mean, how many people do you know of that sort of like are 18, 19 and decide, I'm going to go and help the good people of Afghanistan, or I'm going to help the good people of whoever? People do it all the time. Yes, is the only thing. Where I think there's a discussion to be had is that we kind of have to stop thinking about a person's only doing good if they're coming out of a religious building. And there are lots and lots and lots and lots of people, millions of people, who are living the life that Jesus Christ would want them to live. But they don't acknowledge that in prayer or by going to church or whatever. They don't acknowledge it because inside of them, there is a good person wanting to do well and wanting to go and help the world. And I don't think we can count people doing well and expressing good practice by the amount of people who go to church. It is about the amount of people who just do stuff, whether they and if they were to look back at what they've done, they said, oh, that's what is in the gospel, or there was an epistle and it was in that one. They just go and do it, right? They just go and help. And they may do it because they politically feel that way, or just because that socially they feel they should do it. Or it could be they're just walking down the street and they see somebody and they think, I have got to help that person. The Sikh tradition, whereby they do their, they will not walk past a person who's been threatened. And if they, feel that they have to intervene, they will do. Other people will do that. Now, they may not be Sikhs. Right? They may not have been anywhere near. They probably couldn't even spell the word, right? But they will still do it because it's inside them. And so if you're saying, is goodness still about in the world? In spades. There's no question about that. But if you're saying, is it all going to come out of faith? I don't know what the future of faith and denominational religion is. I suspect that long after I've left this planet, under 200 years' time, there will probably be a massive merging over the years of different views and political thinking and social thinking, and one way or another, people will probably be a lot more just go out and do stuff rather than feel that they have to go out and do stuff and sort of account for it on a Sunday morning or wherever. I remember somebody saying to me once that they believed a lot of faith, and this is their view, I'm not saying it's mine, but their view was that faith is basically about controlling people, that it's about, you tell them that they can do this, they can do that, they can do the other, and they can't do this and they can't do that and they can't do the other. Somebody once said to me about the Roman Catholic tradition, and as I say, I'm merely relaying what they said. But they said that there's a drinking culture at times in the Roman Catholic Church because they don't allow sex and anything else, but they'll let them drink because they've got to give them something. Now, I don't know whether that's true or whether it's false or what it is. I don't know, right? Some people will look at society and say, well, you, for instance, won't touch caffeine and things like that. Some people will look at it and go, it's not for me, I'm not having any of that. I like a cup of tea too much. I like a can of Coke too much. But I'll still do all the stuff you want to do. I'll still go out and help people. I'll still go and knock on the door of the old lady down the street and say, do you want me to paint your fence for you? I'll still go and do all that. But don't label me as being part of that faith, because I don't believe this bit. That's the bit I don't believe. And I think there's an awful lot of people who either wittingly or unwittingly lead their lives like that.
Thank you, Joe. I love your show. Big fan of yours, and I hope people listening. You don't have to be in Lancashire to listen to Joe's show. You can go online to BBC Radio Lancashire every Sunday and listen to it. You can listen to it on demand as well, so it doesn't even have to be on a Sunday. But I really appreciate you giving me an hour of your time, and thank you very much.
No, it's no problem. All right, look after yourself.
You too. See you later. Bye. Thanks for watching For All the Saints. This show needs your help to grow. Please like the video, comment your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone you think would enjoy it. Thank you.